get this thing started. Happy Friday, everybody. I love that World Mental Health Day falls on a Friday, and thank you for spending it with us, whether it's the morning or the afternoon for you. I'm very excited to have you all here. Um, we could continue to have a couple of people joining us. We are doing registration a bit different this time, so some people are only now registering, so I'm letting them in as they come. So if I've not met you, my name is Jessica Rowland. I'm the Senior Specialist for Inclusive Peace here at the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers. And we're really excited to welcome you here if this is your first time or if you're returning to our inclusivity community of practice. And so today we have a really important topic in celebration of World Mental Health Day, focusing on integrating mental health into peace building, promoting healing and resilience for sustainable peace. And so we're going to hear a number from a number of speakers who are working in this field. This field is one of the most, I would say, innovative areas to be in peace building and long overdue in what's needed and really critical in today's discussion, I think, no matter where you are. So without further ado, we're going to start with our panel before we go into breakout rooms a little later. But first, I will turn it to our first speaker, who is Angie Yoder-Mina, who is the Executive Director of Green String Network and who we've been working with for a while here at the Peacemakers Network. Angie, I would first ask you this first question around how are you advancing mental health and psychosocial support within your peace building work? And what is one major lesson learned from your work that you would like to share? So I know there's many lessons, but if you could try to pick one.
No problem. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Really nice to be here this morning. So at GSN, I think we're working like most of you at this really tough intersection right now, where like three funding streams are collapsing all at once: health, humanitarian aid, and peace building. USAID's sudden closure in January 2025 devastated Kenya's health sector, but also the peace building infrastructure in the funding sense. It taught us the hardest lesson, I think, dependency kills. And we've been talking about that for a long time, but it really, I think, has hit home this year. Um, our healing-centered peace building approach, I hope, has been built differently. We don't provide mental health services. We're trying to build prevention infrastructure. So we talk a lot about prevention in the terms of peace building, but we're also talking about prevention in terms of mental health. And that communities own these themselves with peace builders really as our foundation. So I'll give a really concrete example. In Nanuki, a couple weeks ago, two young people in mental health crisis called for help. Hospitals couldn't respond. Police had no training. Um, the community infrastructure just did not exist. We'd never worked there. And both of these young people, unfortunately, hurt themselves and did not make it. And we look at that in a different sense, where a same kind of thing happened, where we had trained peace builders who are circle keepers. A similar crisis happened with completely different outcomes. Community members responded within hours, families mobilized, people in distress were held through their pain, lives were saved. And this built on funding that we had years ago, not that we have right now. It's still functioning because there are peace builders in those communities who felt that they could actually engage with that. And our major lesson is infrastructure outlasts funding, services don't. And so that's, I think, our main thing. And we've spent the last 9 years building this model as a basis of the WHO mental health pyramid, where community care and self-care are at the pyramid bottom, where pastors, imams, teachers, peace builders, so all the folks that we work with in this network really exist. And we train resource facilitators in their own community who then train young peace builders as circle keepers who facilitate ongoing healing circles. It's self-replicating capacity. This is what peace builders do. And I think we have to stop seeing ourselves as service providers, but as building of infrastructure. And I think that's what peace building does really well. So thanks for asking that question.
No, thank you, Angie. I think that's a really great way of saying of how do we deepen those partnerships and structures rather than it just be an add-on. Because if we're, as we all know, if we're waiting on funding in this environment, we may be waiting a while. At least another, what is it now? 2 years, 3 years, 3 years. But so okay. Same question around how are you advancing mental health and psychosocial support within your peace building work and a major lesson learned to Raj Lillis, who is the mental health and psychosocial support technical advisor and who was recently with me with Ackway at the G20 Interfaith Forum in South Africa. So Raj, over to you.
Hello, Jessica. Thank you. And I'm glad to be here. So in my case, as primarily what I do is mental health and psychosocial support. The primary work is on developing programs in that. So I use MHPSS by adopting a more integrated and bi-directional approach. And I think by that I mean you use MHPSS as an entry point for peace building. So the programming surrounding it is not just addressing individual well-being, but also to help participant process shared grievances and restore trust and rebuild social cohesion that has been damaged by conflict. So these processes of sharing difficult experiences in a safe, facilitated space often leads to increased empathy, and it reduces the mentality that the other is the other. But at the same time, so as I've mentioned, so it's primarily MHPSS, but at the same time, integrating peace building into the MHPSS program that we have. And the same as what was mentioned, it is really highly relevant to train local community workers. They can identify themselves as peace builders or just really concerned individuals in community building, and we should really invest in them. And our trainings on these community workers are designed to address the underlying social determinants of mental health. So oftentimes that includes conflict-related issues, discrimination, injustice, violence against women and girls, and exclusion on so many layers. So we link psychosocial activities with community level peace, anything that they are already doing, or identifying the structures that they already have and adapting your programming on those. And we also find that it is very effective to have initiatives that are joined with the community problems or that potentially can address their problems, such as livelihood projects, and integrating it with nonviolent communication, for example, to ensure that mental well-being is viewed as a resource for peace. I think that I already mentioned it, strengthening local capacity. That is the biggest lesson that, or one of the major lessons, I guess, that I would highlight this morning, that healing is relational. It is not just individual. So while there's an aspect of mental health that you have to, process your own peace, at the end of the day, it is relational, and its effectiveness is tied to a sense of justice and social change. And so while the clinical layer is important, we need to address the broader social and structural harms that cause the distress and inhibit peace. Because if we don't, it won't produce sustainable peace building outcomes. Yeah, I guess that's the biggest lesson I have for now. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Raj. And I think that it's perfect tie-in to what Angie was saying about this infrastructure and like what do we mean by what does that include in the infrastructure and the local capacity, the cultural sensitivities, all of these components of the infrastructure. I think like we're just building on what you're both saying. So let me go next to Ufra Mir, who is a peace psychologist and founding director of the International Center for Peace Psychology. Ufra, what is your take on your major lesson learned from your work that you would like to share, and to talk a little bit more about your work in advancing mental health and psychosocial support within peace building?
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, Angie and others who I've seen before. In terms of my work, I think I've been fortunate enough to be doing this intersectional work since my high school itself. In my high school itself, I realized there's a need for mental health integration with with peace building. So I've been working at the intersection now for the past 14 years. I work on peace building, mental health, psychosocial support, arts, and conflict transformation, and also spirituality. So and the need for that, of course, came from the gap I saw that was existing in the field. It didn't make sense for me to even imagine peace building without looking at people's fears, emotions, traumas, which I think is the foundation of any kind of trust building, which is, really critical for peace building if you want to have dialogue or build deeper connections with the community for long-lasting or sustainable peace building work. So one of the things, of course, that I have, and recently my focus has also shifted to decolonization in my work, and what does that look like? And a lot of that I do that through is contextualizing everything, keeping in community oriented, localizing it, looking at Indigenous wisdom and what does that mean, and if there are already structures that are existing, how to leverage those. So for instance, how I think it was Rod, just somebody talking about healing, which is relational, and it's also not linear, it's cyclical, and it can, you can go from point A to point B and then go back to point A after some days. And different people also have different ways of understanding self-care. For instance, in our societies, which are more interdependent, the idea of self is very different, and then self-care is very different. For me, if my community is not doing well, I don't feel well. So there's I in we and we in I. And that kind of community support in itself is important. And then when you look at Kashmir, for instance, where I come from, which is a conflict region, and there's a systemic oppression in place. So mental health is both a privilege. Even to talk about mental health is a privilege, and it's also political, because you can't just be talking about the what you can do at a certain level without acknowledging that there is an overarching framework in place which is affecting everything that people do in terms of policy level or their personal lives as well. I've been doing this work for the past 14 years in Kashmir pro bono, actually. So there are also ways to navigate things without looking at funding, for instance. You can, a lot of my work in Kashmir, as I said, has been voluntarily. And I've also I've been building a team. So you can do this work with the support of course, local volunteers and community members. Funding, of course, makes it easier. You have access to a lot more resources, but there are also different ways to look at it and different ways of leveraging what is already there. So yeah, in terms of my biggest lesson, as I said, I take a lot of inspiration from the local arts, language, spirituality, because psychosocial support especially can mean different things for different people. For somebody in Gaza, it can mean having freedom to protest on the streets without getting jailed for it. It's same in Kashmir. Or eating food together with your family is a form of psychosocial support, or praying religiously, is a form of psychosocial support. So having that understanding and always listening to people. So one of the biggest lessons for me has been a very humbling one, which is that oftentimes when we first start in this field, we go into the field thinking that we are now going to teach people how to do lives differently, right? And then you're very immediately humbled in the process. And I've realized that at least and at most, you can be a facilitator holding space for people, and they know how to heal. They've been doing this for a long time, with or without me. So when you hold that space with more authenticity and care and nurture and good intentions, that is what goes a long way in terms of building trust. And I've been fortunate enough to have built that trust with the community. I will take a pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ufra. And we've known each other now for a couple of years, and still one of the first things you ever said in listening to you speak that still resonates with me, building on what you said, is how support can be a privilege, in the sense that uh, in many societies, this type of support is so individualistic and not looking at it from a community-centered approach, where in some of the communities that you work in, and that others in this call work in, it's not the approach of, and is seen as selfish, looking at it from an individual point of view, and having to adapt to that mentality for that community kind of support and approval. So I've always kind of, it's changed my lens a little bit on things. So thank you, Ufra. I now go, in building on what Ufra said, to Andres Martinez, who is the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Coordinator at the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, and who we've also worked with in the past at the network when he was formerly USIP. But over to you, Andres. How are you advancing mental health and psychosocial support in your work, and what's a major lesson learned?
Thanks, Jessica, and good morning, everyone. I just landed from a very long trip from Istanbul, so I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. I basically want to share something that I addressed at the part forum, as I was saying, in Istanbul, which is basically that we've been working to identify community-based evidence needs. Similarly to what other colleagues have already expressed, we're trying to really understand from the ground what is happening there, what practices are being developed as we speak, and perhaps for generations have been used in all of these communities, both in our work at JLI and also previously with USIP and the network. That was a fantastic experience, where we've identified that beyond providing psychoeducation and psychological first aid training to religious actors, which is still, I think, a very good investment, we also need to do a little bit of prospecting, which for me means really digging deep and trying to understand what are those practices, what experiences, what knowledge exists out there, and perhaps maybe sharing it with the world. But then another lesson is, I think, what I would like to call a shift in paradigm, where beyond looking at the individual structures in MHPSS, we should look at the social structures that are basically the reason for why we're having all these different MHPSS issues in the first place. I don't think that's a new idea for many in the room, but it's, I think, a message that we need to share with the world. And then second, that beyond training for religious actors, we also need to provide some training from our own experience to the MHPSS sector. So basically, faith responsiveness and sensitivity to those psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, etc., that are working on the ground with these individuals. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. That, again, going back to the key partnerships and deepening capacities on both sides. I now go to Sarah Vander Walt, Senior MHPSS Policy Advisor with HealthNet TPO. Sarah, over to you. How are you advancing mental health and psychosocial support in your work, and a major lesson learned?
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, so this is my first time on this platform, and really exciting to be with other pioneers in MHPSS and Peacebuilding. I didn't realize how informal this was going to be, so I actually prepared a little bit of a presentation. And I was just thinking about it while everybody else was talking, and I thought it would still be interesting just to showcase a little bit while I'm talking how the approach that we have taken. And I don't know why, even though we have been working with technology for a very long time, I still can't remember how this works. Where are we? We are over here. Yes. Okay. So I I'm presenting from HealthNet TPO's experience, and this is mostly within the Dutch Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan. I thought that this would be really interesting to showcase because it actually highlights how MHPSS can be used to achieve the objectives of peace building, or like tools of peace building. So what we did was we worked with self-care and collective care. We worked with Indigenous knowledge, and we worked with the youth. We worked with couple engagements. So really identifying relationships, the individual, the collective as being our sort of entry points. And what we found was that by using MHPSS, we were actually able to achieve the objectives of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So this really highlighted the importance of MHPSS providing structural change through shifting norms and values, addressing the root causes of oppression and barriers for women to be involved with peace, and also shifting cycles of violence. I also am being a little bit cheeky. I wanted to highlight 3 main lessons learned. And again, I think it's using the work that we've just done really highlights what is it about MHPSS that is so important to be integrated into peace building. And there were three areas. The one was the importance of working with systems, that by using the definition of psychosocial well-being and the social ecological model, we can actually map out factors and linkages that can support peace building. The other point that was like really surprising for me was the sense of safety. In MHPSS, safety is foundational to the work that we do. It's highlighted in the trauma informed approach, in the HOPFUL principles, which is used to guide a lot of the MHPSS programs and tools. But what we found within South Sudan and Colombia was actually safety being a tool that can be used to support the integration of MHPSS and peace building. Without safety, without the sense of safety, as highlighted in this definition, we don't have creativity. There's no real opportunities to build connection, to build relationships, to create spaces within a society where we can build change, which then led to the third lesson. And as mentioned earlier in all the panelists' discussions, is that the personal is political. And this goes back to the women's liberation movement from the 1960s and the 1970s, where women were encouraged to look at what is their personal experiences of violence and coming together to build radical change by identifying the root causes of violence, of their oppression. And I think this is so important because we can look at peace building, we can look at MHPSS as being structural change, but it also has to start at the individual, and it also has to start at the collective awareness, which links back to this idea that a lot of times we have experts who come in to communities and tell people how they need to address peace, how they need to be looking at their well-being, and not actually sitting and listening to the experts who are the people who are living with us. And so by using this approach, we've actually found that radical change takes place through the personal and through collective awareness, and then that builds the momentum for building peace. Yes, so I was a little bit cheeky there by having 3. I hope that's okay. and is mostly reflected on our current experience because, firstly, the South Sudan and Colombia projects coming to an end, and I just thought that would be a lot more focused to be able to say what our key lessons have been and what our approach is. And it very much ties into the previous panelists' discussion. So thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know I saw in the chat, if you're okay sharing those, the slides that you're showcasing, just because it was hard to zoom in on. I know others are interested to see it. So now I'll go to my last two speakers, Lila Schwartz, who is the Program and Psychology Director with POMA Global, and Alessandra Herberhold, who is the Exit Interventionist for Parents for Peace, to hear from them about how they're advancing their mental health and psychosocial support in peace building and a major lesson learned.
Yeah, thanks. I guess Ali and I can speak together because we really work together. Ali is very senior and works on domestic violence, domestic terrorism and violence reduction in the US domestically. And I've worked much more broad in detention settings, but I think most of the people here work in development humanitarian settings, application with foreign aids, whereas Ali and I are working like with collaborative teams, with families, with parents on a long-term basis to look at violence and behavior and understand what can be done. So I'll let Ali share more, but I think the biggest lesson learned is really the context and cultural aspects of where people are coming from and like slowing down intergenerational trauma. So what can be done, barriers put in place. And I think Parents for Peace and where we work do a lot more than just MHPSS. And I have a challenge with the word MHPSS because now it kind of umbrellas everything. But I think everyone here really works on mental health from the clinical side. But yeah, I'll let Ali share as well.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I think even just our name speaks to the mission of the organization, Parents for Peace. So I just wanted to give just a tiny bit of backstory about why we realized that there was a need. About 10 years ago, there was a family, the Bloodsoes, whose young son, he carried out a targeted violence attack on a army base or a military base and took the life of one soldier and injured another one. And at the time, the parents realized that there wasn't any support for families who had become radicalized. And that's when they realized that there was a need, and they partnered with our executive director and created Parents for Peace. Originally, we started just as a helpline to help refer people out, and we've really grown a lot. Currently, we offer a few different services. So our organization's nonprofit that started with the helpline, but now we work directly with the families or the immediately impacted and meet with them on a weekly basis. We have peer exit specialists with lived experience to work one-on-one with the person of concern. We offer peer support groups for family, and we provide educational trainings for law enforcement, schools, and other organizations. A lot of the way that we see peace building happening is through stories of recovery, resilience, and hope. So seeing the success of people, like, we know that in order to make big changes, we have to start with little changes, and it can have a ripple effect. So if we can impact one person's life to help them get off it's called pathway to violence, to get off the pathway to violence and to find like a safer way to live their life that's more productive, then we know that has a ripple effect on the community, on their family, on the people that could have been victims of targeted violence, and the secondary trauma that comes with, and direct trauma that comes with having that happen in your community or viewing it yourself. We don't specifically provide mental health services. We provide action-oriented coaching with the family and participants because they're in crisis when they come to us. All of our work is remote, so we take people from all across the country at different stages of where they are on the pathway to violence. Some people, their families call and they're in the very early stages. Some people, they are awaiting trial because they've been charged with terroristic offenses. We've seen a lot of success with the families that we've worked with and seen them successfully disengage from these groups. We really work to work alongside the family and have the opportunity to work with the individual that they're concerned about. And we do that by providing support, companionship, and mentorship in a judgment-free, accepting, and empathetic space, regardless of their ideology. This has allowed us to successfully help them disengage and turn their lives around for the better. We often work with individuals that other clinicians and practices refuse to work with because of their beliefs, or they feel that they're a liability. And so a lot of them feel very jaded by the mental health system, and it's very hard for them to reach out and ask for help or accept help because they've repeatedly been rejected. We see the impact of isolation, online grooming, and exposure to like inappropriate contact or content and the impact that it has on young people. So we help teach people digital literacy, gain an understanding on what they're learning and viewing online, and help them to discern between fact and fiction. So we're building peace through hope and recovery from hate and helping people get off the pathway to violence. This makes our community safer, schools safer, and family repair fractured relationships. And one of the other things that we do is we connect local community mental health. We screen practitioners in their area to help match them with someone that's appropriate in skill set to assess and work with them, that's also willing to work with them despite their charges or ideological beliefs. And we offer support groups for the families to build a peer network, because having a radicalized loved one or a loved one that's charged with a terrorism offense is especially isolating and creates a deep feeling of self-blame, shame, and guilt. So we want to extend our ability to help families. We want to partner with juvenile justice systems to offer an alternative to incarceration for true rehabilitation and to help improve the trajectory of their young lives to produce a sustainable long-term peace outcome in general.
I would just add one thing.
Yeah.
Many of the people that Ali and I work with also have inflicted violence abroad and return to places and need reintegration. And there usually tends to be like a shame or punishment approach. But Ali and the teams really try to find ways to have purpose, which helps with transitional justice and reconciliation, because they're looking to like speak with the people who perpetrate violence, but also on the other side of like transitional justice aspects, instead of continuously reoffending. So I just wanted to add that.
No, and I think that this is kind of listening to you all talking about the different sectors. This is my favorite part of my job, is getting to, we get into so many silos of the ways that we're working. If you're working on preventing violent extremism, you're in this bubble. If you're doing humanitarian work, you're in this bubble, or human rights or peace. So it's always great with meetings like this, where we can bring in different voices across the different sectors to say, here are the different approaches, here are the different conversations, which is why the next question is going to be really interesting about, and we've heard a little bit already about, what are the primary obstacles to advancing the integration of mental health and peacebuilding efforts, and what successes have you had in addressing these challenges? And I know Ufa already was overcoming the funding hurdle, but I'd love to hear what everyone is thinking. So back over to you, Angie.
Great. So I think one of the core problems when we look at issues of mental health is that it's a traditional healthcare response. But traditional healthcare responses were designed really for stable context with functioning institutions, including functioning governance. And our situations don't actually bring that out. When institutions collapse and entire populations experience we can call it collective trauma. It doesn't have to be collective trauma. It could be collective suffering, collective pain. We don't have to use the kind of medical terms, but we know what we're talking about here, I think, as a collective. Mainstream mental health systems simply can't meet the scale of need. They don't scale to collective spaces. And this is why peace builders have such a role to play, because we find ourselves in those nooks and crannies of where people are experiencing this individual and collective pain and the overlay of it. So the obstacles that we've really found in our context, that funding gap of unabridged, traditional mental health psychosocial approaches. Kenya has like 1.4 mental health workers per 100,000. The global average is 9. Less than 1% of the health budget goes to mental health. You know what? In today's world, with the collapse of the health system, it's never going to go, it's going down, it's not going up. So that's not the answer for scalability of mental health services. It's just never, like, even if they reach WHO's target of 5%, clinical services alone wouldn't achieve population coverage for our communities. Like it just won't. Like the math doesn't work. Like I one day looked, like we need 50,000 plus professionals. That's like a 30-year plan undertaking billions. That's not there. It's never going to be there. And you know what? My government in Kenya, the governments in Somalia, the governments in South Sudan, they don't care. Like the idea that government is going to help scale this is just a fallacy. And it's more of a fallacy today in kind of the post-USAID world than ever before. So that's just one of the big obstacles. The other one is that, and it isn't to this group here, I think that the group you've assembled is doing this in some of the most innovative and creative ways, but most of the sector of peace building and mental health psychosocial still remains separate fields. Like we're not integrating it. It's still piecemeal. It's maybe at one point in the project cycle, it's not throughout, it's led only by mental health people. It's, like it's not integrated, and trauma continues to fuel the cycles of violence. Political violence requires community-led healing, not just individual therapy. And we've all said that. We just can't counsel our way out of structural violence, and we never will. And that's whether it's in the United States or it's in Kenya or it's in, Central or Latin America. Like it just won't happen. And this third is, and I'm a peace builder, like deeply, and I've been told this for 15 years as I've been doing this work, is that as a peace builder, I should step back. I'm not the expert. But you know what? Peace builders didn't listen to it. Like peace builders continued to engage. If we'd listened, we'd have left people, alone in pain because there were no services available. And peace builders just didn't listen. Like, I guess that's part of us being little renegade. Like we're gonna be out there and doing things different. But like this idea and the fear of re-traumatization isn't the fear of local peace builders. They live daily within traumatized context. They know how, like Ufra, I can't say it right now. Sorry, Ufra. Like Ufra said, they've been doing this. Our communities, our grandmothers are like, we've been doing this. Like the healing doesn't just come because outsiders have come with these new ideas. It's been there genuinely. And so the fear of re-traumatization is the fear of Western trained experts operating within biomedical frameworks. Our success as GSN is that we're a network, and now we have network partners who we're not funding, who are genuinely funding this at community level, that it continues on. And they're doing this because like the community, like they've made this the basis of all work they do at the community level with young people, because being in circle, being connected, relational healing creates greater openness to change, improves outcomes for other things at the community level, and it actually builds genuine, like resilience is a hard word because everybody uses it, but I've seen real resilience being built.
Yeah, no, listening to you, there was this question in my mind when you're saying, no country is going to prioritize, this type of funding or these types of scaling up initiatives. And I was trying to think in my mind, I'm like, what country would be the one that would actually possibly try to do better in this space? And then I got to thinking, well, I wonder if it's a matter of leadership and values of where you place, the importance of where you want the money and support to go. And thinking about, and again, like the value system, and that's kind of the crisis of where we are in a lot of the peace building that we're doing today. Is it a new type of leadership that would actually say we're prioritizing this type of peace approach because all of these other hard power approaches have, and let's just be honest, patriarchal approaches have not worked in the past. So I don't know, maybe I'm naive, or maybe I'm still holding up some mirror of hope that maybe this will be part of addressing some of these longer term challenges in the future, but fingers crossed.
It doesn't have to be government. Maybe it has to be us. Like, that's just it. Like,
Yeah.
prevention exists within all our means. Like, that's the beauty of this. And that's why I'm tired of these big global, like, it has to be government. Well, my government in Kenya does not give a, I can't even say it. They don't care.
Yeah.
But I will say quickly, Ukraine, I mean, the situation and funding for mental health there is disproportionate to anywhere else. And when I was at the State Department, you can see the amount they put through crisis intervention, through peace, through people being returned, and the challenge is cultural adaptation. I mean, Ukrainians, for the most part, didn't want mental health, and it's institutionalized. So I don't know if it's only a leader caring or the money behind it, because sometimes we think that might be a part of the solution, but when the communities themselves, it looks very foreign, it doesn't, it kind of goes the other direction. But
yeah,
just
I mean,
adding points.
it's definitely cultural, but the thing that was coming to my mind was the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and that moment that, she openly wept on television, and for people all over the world. I mean, there was just like, oh my gosh, this woman that's actually openly crying. Like, you can't cry. That's a weak, like all of the, but it just moved the needle on perceptions of what leadership is. And so that's why in my mind, I was thinking like, oh, it is a values thing. Is it an acceptance thing? But I am curious to hear more from Raj on this. So Raj, what do you think the primary obstacles are, and what success have you had?
Yeah, a lot of the things that I had in mind were already really covered. So it's very interesting that I'm not alone with the obstacles that that we're facing. So one, I think it was covered earlier as well. Like, there's still like a conceptual, unfortunately, and jargon divide. And for me, if you are tagged that, okay, you do MHPSS, some people cannot just wrap their hand around that you also do peace building, and that it should be separated, right? We understand that, peace building and MHPSS, they come from different disciplinary institutional homes and disciplinary languages. And sometimes it can be an obstacle it can really be difficult in designing truly integrated programs. And it has implication on the funding as well. How sometimes it's very rigid and short-term funding cycles that you get, and the structures are very siloed. Like, okay, you just do health. MHPSS is health. It should be different from peace, and it should be different from development. So making long-term integrated programs difficult to finance and sustain, especially for communities. And was also mentioned earlier, what if it's the community that doesn't want it? The stigma around mental health can still make people, especially as I found, especially in the context here in Iraq, men and community leaders don't want it. They're reluctant to participate. It has anything to do with mental health. Now, a lot of those points, including programming and community entry point, what has really changed is community listening. Community participation has to be there, and it includes sitting down. And we talk a lot about, how we should be culturally competent and understand the community. But I think we don't talk as much with cultural humility. The uh, you being aware of your own understanding and be willing to suspend that and to learn again their own language, their own term. In my case, moving from Southeast Asia programming and to West Asia, now here in Iraq, mentioned by a lot of the other panelists, trauma looks very and is understood in many ways. And the terms that might needed to be used should come from the community. And yeah, programming can reflect that. And we hope also that we can advocate to generate more evidence with community-based programming and hopefully move the funding. I also would like to add on what I think Angie mentioned earlier, that sometimes the project that is sort of funded, they wanted you to put up mental health clinics. And yes, you provide the service, but are the community actually going to access it? Because it's a mental health clinic and they don't want it. And there is still, we know this in many literature, but there still needs more work to be done in the community level, that the understanding that, yes, it is important to have specialized supports, but a huge chunk of what, and I talk about this in the forum that we attended together, Jessica, that a huge chunk of mental health support should be community-based, led by the community. They can support themselves and build that structure. And Peace Builders is a lot of, they can really help build that system as well, community-based system. And lastly, also mentioned earlier by Angie, how again, MHPSS and you have Peacebuilding comes from different has different language and or meaning or understanding of a language. So for example, trauma, as mentioned by Angie, the clinical psychologists, for example, and MHPSS practitioners want to be really, really careful not to inadvertently trigger trauma or exacerbate tension. But in peace building, trauma healing needs to talk. So on one hand, the clinical practice says that, in trauma work, in order for the person to be able to recover from that and cope from that, there's some sort of exposure from time to time. And for peace building, they do that as well in groups, for example, but it's more in your face. And so that tension that, okay, is this safe? So it's the do no harm complexity talk, like, are we doing more harm? And I think there has to be a space where everyone can sit down and really, try and understand what should we do and what is harming the community and not harming the community. What I think is relevant for both practice. Unfortunately, that still sounds very siloed when we come together. It requires a high level of understanding and expertise that sometimes is not always available. So even in peace building, if you want to have that conversation and trauma healing, you still need and require an expertise. But then again, the community knows themselves better. They are experts, and we don't have to push our own agenda and Western understanding, I guess, of what triggers trauma and what trauma looks like.
Thank you, Raj. I've never heard this framing before, but I really like it. Cultural humility. That one's going to stick with me, I think. So going to you, Ufra, what do you think the primary obstacles are in integrating mental health and peace building, and what success have you had in addressing those challenges?
I think to begin with, this may not sound great, but MHPSS in itself is a really fancy term, which just kind of came about because suddenly some people and organizations thought this was important now to use, when on the ground, as I said, people have been doing this work for decades. When I've also talked about the word integration itself, and they find it really problematic because it comes from a place of power and privilege and doesn't always seem to fit in with what the needs on the ground are. And peace can also be a very controversial topic in certain regions. Like in Kashmir, you can't really talk about peace because peace is understood differently. from a liberation lens, for instance. So there are different kinds of connotations. And then with mental health in itself, you have so many, different connotations. There's stigma in itself. As I said, it's political, but it's also a privilege to talk about mental health in places where survival is your main focus on a daily basis. And when we also talk about mental health or care, for instance, unfortunately, a lot of care industry is psychiatrics, centered and focused. So the clinical terms and labels and disorders become very important. And I understand it has some of its own place. Some of the psychiatric issues, for instance, have their own place, and you sometimes do need psychiatric interventions to take care of certain things. But there's also a lot of complexity around it. For instance, in Kashmir, what you may see as schizophrenia, a lot of people may think that a person is possessed by jinns, for instance, and it's a very normal cultural practice where and in a lot of other places too, in the global south, it's not just Kashmir. You would definitely go to a faith healer first and then to a doctor or a professional. So those are some, separately, those are some problems, but within the peace building field as well, there's a lot of, it's still a very patriarchal kind of a field. And by that, I mean that mental health is seen as a very soft skill kind of a thing and not necessary, not foundational, not critical, not crucial. To even talk about emotions, for instance, with mediators sometimes who go into mediation with, poker face and think that that's like a huge skill. We have to first look at what peace building itself is in today's world. And it is devoid of emotions, where, as I said, being emotional or being emotional is seen as a weakness or being unintelligent. So I also see mental health as a tiny spectrum, like a tiny aspect of a bigger spectrum. And the spectrum for me, which I feel more comfortable using, is well-being, which is not just mental health. When people, for instance, have financial issues, you can't just send them to therapy and assume that they're going to be doing well, because finances are a huge factor. Like, people in today's world are losing their jobs, for instance. And in my understanding of holistic well-being, if a person's struggling with financial resources, that is their biggest stressor, and how do we expect them to just feel fine mentally? Because mental health is not just here, it's a very holistic thing. It's relational, it's spiritual, it's existential, it's environmental, and we're seeing with what is happening in terms of climate crisis, for instance, in places with fragile ecosystems. So I think generally, because this new narrative came up recently about integration of MHPSS into peace building, people who do this work have also been stressed out, because now they suddenly they think they have to, be expert to do this work, which is problematic, obviously, because not everybody is an expert in both the fields. Like, as I said, I'm fortunate enough to be doing this intersectional work, but a lot of people have been really stressed out about, like, how do I do this mental health work, but I'm a peace builder, for instance. So I think a lot of these are obstacles, and these are ongoing obstacles. And I think there has to be a change in language, for instance, a change of, things that we use on a daily basis, like PTSD, for instance. It does not make any sense in contexts like Gaza, Kashmir, Afghanistan, because the conflict is ongoing, it's not post. But we don't have the vocabulary to talk about these things, because we're still using some Western frameworks that do not make sense in these contexts. And now, with a lot of things that are happening in the world around us, some of the focus has shifted, but there is still, I think, a lot of I don't know if it's honestly intentional unawareness or just like unawareness in general, but even the guides that people are writing about integration of mental health into peace building. And I've been part of some of these guides that global organizations have done, but there are loopholes and there are gaps. And from a design perspective, like how I've dealt it with, for instance, is all the interventions that I have designed and created at my own Center for Peace Psychology have been very subtle in nature, and I've designed them keeping all of these things in mind, using local inspiration, spirituality, prayers, religion, all of that, to kind of think about, for instance, peace for somebody in Mali could be very different. Maybe for them it's just about having meals, 3 meals a day, or maybe in Kashmir it's about having that freedom of expression, or in other places it can be anything. So we need to also really think about that and unlearn that a lot, that mental health is not just about mental health and psychosocial support. Like, what does that psychosocial support really mean from community? And it can be really different for different communities. Resilience also, for instance, as I was hearing, I was just reminded, it's something that is overused in our space now. The trauma healing, the resilience building, and these become buzzwords, of course, and the focus then shifts there and people start using them more. But resilience is also often seen as something that the onus of resilience and trauma healing is still on the oppressed communities, which is very, very problematic for me. Because then you're, kind of taking away the accountability of the systemic oppression and people involved in that. And of course, resilience is a human natural phenomenon, and people adapt. Like Kashmir has had conflict for 80 years and we've adapted and we're still going on. People are going on. And my grandparents, they had it worse than probably us. But to kind of glorify that and romanticize that is a problem. And I often see the language continuously being used in different kinds of initiatives and proposals. So we have to be really mindful of how we are also talking about a lot of these things. That's what I'm saying. I feel like there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done, even when we talk about safe space. And I do too in the Kashmir context, but I also struggled with it, because what does safety even mean in a place with ongoing conflict? When I have to do a certain workshop, let's say in Kashmir, 90% of my energy is spent into thinking about, the logistics of workshop, like people who come there. Am I like, how are they going to be there safely? Are they going to go back to their homes safely? Who's going to be in the space? Are people from the government going to be in the space, or, others who we don't want there, because then people wouldn't feel safe enough to even express themselves. So the 10% is then kind of spent on the content and everything on the workshop itself. So there's a lot that goes on, I think, in terms of stigma, resources, the conflict, the complexity of ongoing conflicts itself, where, abnormal has been normalized. And as I think it was Raj or somebody who was saying, or NG, that people don't really, they're not scared of dying. They worry more about dignity on a daily basis, and how do we maintain that dignity even when we do the work, that integration of mental health, psychosocial with peace building, which, as I said, for a lot of Indigenous communities is kind of, it happens by default. It happens in storytelling, it happens in folklores, it happens them just by sitting around and having food together. But now we have kind of put labels around these things, and that's where the problem is, because it's a natural disconnect for a lot of people in these communities. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
No, and I love what you were talking about, and we would need to rethink some of and unpacking what some of these terms are. And you mentioned peace is different for different communities, and Principles for Peace has been, I think, 3 or 4 year initiative now that's been unpacking that, going across all the different regions and many different countries across different sectors, to unpack what actually peace means to communities. And it sounds like there's a lot of synergy, as you described it, as this very fancy term with MHPSS, maybe rethinking what mental health and psychosocial support actually means to communities, what it looks like, and reframing the conversation as a unit, and how they have that synergy there. So there's an interesting project for anybody who wants to take that on. Over to you, Andres. What do you think the primary obstacles are in advancing mental health and peace building, and what successes have you had in addressing those challenges?
So as we all know, this is nothing new. Funding right now is the main challenge, alongside with the tectonic shifts in the international system both at a political but also at a moral level. I agree with you, Jessica, that is quite concerning. So, since we're talking about mental health, then I thought, the psychologists have something to offer to help us rethink what is happening. And I think that from systemic theory, where crises are indications that we need to change, where constraints can be leverage points, we can, through small shifts, affect the larger system. Basically, that's what systems theory tells us. Also, that old ways of thinking, that old interventions that we used sometimes are the reason why symptoms continue happening, right? So what if we were to pull the string, or a string that has that catalytical effect that we are all looking for? I think it's really concerning that about 2% of all the funding for that mental health is 2% of all the funding for health, generally speaking. That's even less than the amount that governments in Latin America spend on propaganda. So we're really not working with much. And that, of course, will have an impact long term. I also think that an alert that I wanted to make is that with the food crisis, we can expect to see huge problems in the near future amongst those that are currently babies or children. Of course, we know that a lack of proper nutrition, certain nutrients, etc., affect cognition, rational thinking, executive thinking, etc. So that's something that I want to just raise the alert, because it's something that we are going to be facing in the near future. So I think that that string that we can pull is perhaps working with religious actors, and not to be afraid to integrate religion into the work that we do. I am really convinced that there are a lot of solutions there. And when I say working with religious actors, I don't mean working with them in a tokenistic manner, but actually thinking of them as full-time partners that we can learn so much from, and that, as we all know, are having a huge impact on the ground, especially where the mental health sector does not reach and where the government can't reach.
Couldn't agree more. Sarah, same question to you. Primary obstacles, and how have you had successes in addressing them?
Great, thanks, Jessica. So a lot of it resonates across, and I think that's the fact that there's such, all of us have such different experiences, but we are coming up with the same barriers. Is really important to take note of, and to think strategically, well, how do we address this if we are wanting to bring not MHPSS, mental health and peace building together. But just based on my own experience has been, there seems to still be this understanding or perception that by bringing mental health and psychosocial well-being together with peace building, we are politicizing MHPSS. And so in the different organizations I have worked in, there really has been a huge pushback on not integrating MHPSS in peace building. And so that's kind of been the main foundational argument that they've had, where it's we need to be neutral, we're providing humanitarian aid, we're in development, we're not in peace building. And so and I think this takes a deeper reflection, because when we talk about mental health, when we talk about psychosocial well-being, we're actually talking about the political. People can't have a mental health without stepping into the political. And that goes back to what I presented earlier with the personal is political. And also referring to, the different types of violence, structural violence, cultural violence. And if we are wanting to have people achieve a sense of mental health, we have to address the political, which then reflects onto, well, this field that we're working in within itself is politically led. There are political agendas. We've seen it. A lot of us who have been working in this field for a long time, we knew the the politics behind humanitarian work. We know that who gets funded is very much dependent on what states are pledging money to certain countries' disasters and needs that are presented at a global level, not at the national community level. And so we knew this, but I think the last few years have really shown how political things are. And so what that also means is that us as practitioners need to reflect and say, well, what is my role within this? How am I decolonizing my work and my position? And what is my mental health? What am I taking on? What am I contributing towards? So I think that's the biggest thing for me right now, in terms of this like hesitancy around bringing mental health and psychosocial support and peace building together. And then also just like this cultural notions of what is mental health, what is peace. We have, a lot of work that has been done, the everyday peace indicators. Martha Bragan does an incredible work with like working on the actual definitions of psychosocial well-being. In South Africa, where I'm from, there's the continuous trauma work that's being done, which recognizes that trauma is not post. So there's a lot of things, and sorry, it's a bit of a mismatch, but also, and this probably goes towards like, well, how do we respond to these different things, is that there's a lot of work that's being done, but we're not speaking to each other. We're not sharing knowledge. And I think that's one of the ways that we can actually work with integrating a lot more and strengthening the work. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, this reminds me when you were talking about how everything's become more political, something that we haven't unpacked a lot in this conversation yet, but I'm sure Lila and Alessandra would actually probably have a lot to say on this, but the online components of this and the amount of dis and misinformation and what that does for people's mental health, of knowing like what is fact, what is fiction, what is truth, all of these additional elements that are now part of this changing conflict landscape. But over to you, Lila and Alessandra.
Hi. I will say that we've seen a lot of success with the families that we work with, and seeing people disengage from violent extremist groups and go on to live really happy, successful lives, turn their lives around. We look at things through an addiction model, so we know that this doesn't happen overnight. It could happen to anyone. It cycles. There's likely going to be some kind of relapse, but it doesn't mean all the information that they learned before just goes away. So I do believe that when working with our population, you have to be a specialist because our cases are so complex. And I do believe that from the outside looking in, people put too much focus on mental health and not enough focus on mental wellness. Clinical interventions is but one small part of the recovery process to achieve peace with the people that we work with. For our population, medication and therapy just are not enough to help someone disengage with violent extremism. They need coaching, they need case management, they need peer support, they need community engagement, and they need pro-social engagement outside of their home. Unfortunately, this isn't something that's covered by insurance, and it's not usually covered by mental health funding. We are also facing a funding shortage, and it has an impact on our ability to increase our volume of services to people. Most of our clients don't have severe mental illness, but they have a history of trauma and some depression or anxiety, but are mentally unwell because of their other compounding factors like fractured relationships, abuse, isolation, exposure to inappropriate and violent content. We focus on supporting the families and not changing their ideology. What we do is we want to help them get their life to such a good place that they don't feel like they want, and they don't want the ideology anymore, and they give it up, rather than telling them you have to give it up. It even works when the rest of the world shames and blames the parents. We need to be open to allowing people to make mistakes and to give them grace. The media misinterprets it to put it kind of into like a neat little box in order to dismiss the person, instead of looking at the larger problem that we're facing that creates the circumstances for people to become radicalized. We also have to be mindful that the people that I work with are in crisis and they need specialized help. We can't just throw any clinician at them and think that it'll fix the problems that they're facing, because it won't. It's very complex, and most clinical clinicians say that it's too complex for them when I reach out to them. We've had one of the consistent problems is that there just isn't enough specialized trained clinicians and funding to have a larger staff to provide trainings and more one-on-one services. Mainstream mental health services don't meet all the needs that our clients work with because they need more than just medication and therapy. We look at violent extremism through the addiction model and know that it's a long-term process where the person needs to change their people, places, and things. We recognize that this radicalization didn't happen overnight, so we don't expect it to change following any specific timeline, and will likely not be able to change overnight. So we know that it's going to be a long-term process, and we work alongside with them. The average case that we work with is about 9 months to a year before they're able to disengage, and we meet with them on a weekly basis. Sometimes when they're deeper in the ideology, it takes longer. We've had cases that have been 2 years, and that's someone that they're meeting with on a regular basis and doing very, very intensive, like coaching, supportive. And we do other things beyond like talking about violent extremism, like mock job interviews, because that's a way to build confidence. And when you have confidence, you don't want your violent extremist ideology anymore. Like, people cling on to those things because they lack self-confidence and meaning and a sense of identity in a different way. And so really focusing on how we can help them build confidence, because we don't focus on, okay, how did you get here? We look at it as, we're here now. What are we going to do about it? And like, that's why we always encourage like the people that we work with and the families to have family clinicians and to have their own individual therapists if they're willing to go. Because those are the people they can process with how you got here. But I think it's also just as important to have like crisis management, like what we do. And I wish that that could be reflected more in funding so we could help more people, to help things like targeted violence not happen, and to help like the prevention aspect instead of reaction aspect once people are either deceased or involved with the criminal justice system. Um, so that's.
I apologize. There was emergency. But I just wanted to add, and I didn't hear all of it, but the one thing that Ali has definitely led a part of peacemaking and barriers is not the isolation and ostracization of people, and giving them a place even when it's so scary to go to. And everyone that I've worked with Ali, the parents, families, aunts, teachers, schools, lawyers, everyone says like they know that the kids and the people and the families know they can go to Ali in an approaching way. And this has helped. I've never seen this in all of what I've done, is making sure that these people don't get this huge separation, like you're a terrorist or you're perpetrating violence, and they're a part of like society, without being completely shamed and taking accountability for what they have done.
Yeah, and actually something Ali said about the support that's needed then to actually help people, and she gave the example of the kind of livelihood employment coaching. That makes me think about the support that they give domestic violence survivors. It's the same in the types of whether it's coaching in that way, access to shelter, access to the judicial services support, like just that it's a mirror of different options that actually help people overall. So we're running a little bit out of time. So we have one final question. So I pose to my speakers the challenge of putting your answer in the form of a tweet. So 30 seconds or less. The question to you all, I'll say, what is one practical thing that you wish international actors or those working in the broader peace building space were aware of when advocating for mental health and psychosocial support? So one thing. Over to you, Angie.
Oh, that's such a big question, but it comes down to me that I'd want mental health is a fancy word, but maybe peace building is another fancy word. So these two fancy words maybe need just to be thrown out. And what we need to understand is that the impact of the pain and suffering isn't a mental health issue that requires this treatment. It's a social crisis that just requires community-based healing.
Okay, that's going on a t-shirt. Raj, try to top it.
I'm not sure I can. That's really good. For me, perhaps invest in local expertise and supervision. The single most practical investment is in long-term and high-quality clinical and programmatic supervision and mentorship and professional development for community workers and peace practitioners.
Okay, so we have a t-shirt collection going now. Ufra, over to you.
Just adding on to that, I think, as I said before, mental health is political and cannot be seen as an individual problem. And neutrality is a bogus idea, doesn't work, doesn't exist, has just made up. Well-being of peace builders, especially frontliners, has to be taken into account. It's a huge crisis out there. People are burnt out, tired, exhausted, and it's still not something that's seen important in peace building. So yeah.
Yeah, everybody here hasn't been talking about anything that they're going through personally now. But Ufra, I like the beginning catchphrases. That's going to be the bumper sticker for this campaign. Andres, over to you.
Work with religious actors, not only those that we call the big hats, but those working on the ground that get their shoes dirty, that actually belong to the communities. That would be my advice.
Perfect. We're getting some diversity in our messaging. Sarah, over to you.
The phrase I kind of think about is terminology matters. And I get so nervous when people start talking, like using the word healing or trauma, because in the context of the areas that we work in, healing is not a point that people can reach. It's actually about transforming. And so trauma has been so politicized. And then just to wrap that up, I think it oversimplifies the integration of MHPSS and peace building. So terminology matters. Let's get back to, how do people name their own experiences? How do they give meaning? What are the stories that they are giving?
And that's such a perfect connection to also peace building. Like, at what point do we say that a country is at peace with, it's the same. And then last but not least, Lila and Alessandra.
Yeah, I would say like the collective collaboration and of the goals and needs of communities and not project-based outcomes.
I would say peace building is achieved through stories of recovery, resilience, and hope, one person at a time through collaborative care. In order to get there, we need to extend empathy, forgiveness, and grace.
That's a perfect way to end. Well, I thank you all for your expertise and advice this morning on how we can better advance the work being done in this area. And just thank you, big thank you for your time. Now we're going to transition into the breakout portion of this session so that we can hear from everybody else in the room. So in your breakout rooms, you will have already an assigned facilitator and note taker. I'm going to put the questions in the chat, but your facilitator will also have those. But the questions are going to be, how have you been promoting mental health and well-being in your peace building work, and what strategies have worked well, and how can we integrate these conversations? And the second one about how can the broader peace building sector advance mental health and psychosocial support approaches towards building peace, and what are the current gaps? So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms and everybody should be able to join. All right, welcome back. So we're going to do a quick readout from the different groups just to get the highlights. So I'll go to group 1. Readout from you both.
Hi. Thank you so much. And we had a really good conversation, especially the field experience many people shared from their peace building work, especially starting from like practicing empathy and active listening, putting ourselves into others' shoes, and by starting from that level, we can make sure that we are supporting people in order to improve their mental health well-being. So that's what we heard from our colleague from North Carolina, and then also we heard from Kenya that saying that they integrated programs, psychosocial support programs, into their peace building projects or the programs that they are doing, rather than doing programs in separate. Always integrating psychosocial support into your work will help you to support your communities, and especially involving young people and women into this work will have a larger impact on the society. And then also we talked about what are the challenges and what sort of gaps we have in this community or in this field. And then we also discussed that importance of having these work or like ideas recorded in the forms of research, or like in any other ways of like storytelling. It is very important for us, so then it's not just shrinked into your community, but it can be spreaded out, and then everyone can follow and practice as well when there is a successful initiatives. And then also many people shared that dialogues, and then also storytelling, and especially people in our group, we also discussed building spaces for other people, and integrating mental health into your programs, and then also as peace builders, we also need support. So those things has to be taken into consideration. So these are some few things that we discussed. And if I missed anything, please add. And also one of the most important thing is, rather than looking at mental health or like well-being, or like this psychosocial support as a separate project or like short-term engagement, it is very important to have it as a long-lasting and community-led programs, and also where we also need more funding for more investments into this from all the levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu and Yemisrak from Group 1. Let's go to Group 2, Reverend Beauty and Hannah.
Okay, I can read out our notes from the session. We had a lot of engagement on this topic and just interest in how to better promote mental health and psychosocial support in peace building work. So we had some really excellent examples from our group about ways that organizations are engaging staff on these topics, doing monthly trainings to center the importance of physical and mental health in every aspect of the work, and then also hosting sessions for the community as well, even just to, like normal physical exercise or something to kind of connect people to one another, and also connect to our bodies and to our minds. One member of our group, Anastasia, who works at different UN agencies in the field, talked about different issues that they've had with integrating mental health and psychosocial support on the ground. So showing this disconnect between an organization like the UN that's promoting these topics at the global level, but there's a disconnect between that global level policy understanding and what the on the ground realities are. In terms of gaps in integrating MHPSS into the field, we talked about the lack of sustainable financing, of course, and also lack of political will and just understanding generally about the importance of this work. AI was actually elevated as something, if done ethically, a way that could help fill some of these gaps, especially on the sustainability front and on training of staff. We talked about the lack of expertise that there is between youth, peace, and security and integrating MHPSS, and sort of how a lot of these different peace building streams are operating in silos and not really together. So how can we combine something like youth empowerment with MHPSS work as well? We talked about the role that religious leaders could play in promoting this work, but also in the ways that faith communities or religious leaders maybe have perpetuated stereotypes or stigmas about mental health support, and how they can actually be empowered to do the opposite and fight back against a lot of those misconceptions. We talked about, increasing staff capacity. So not just how are we promoting this work in the communities that we are working in, but also how are we doing that within our staff as well, ensuring that staff understand the importance of their own care, and that's a huge non-negotiable. And then the last thing that we talked about is the importance of language and how we don't have this universal language across cultures and genders and generations about how we talk about mental health and psychosocial support. And because there is a lack of a universal understanding and language that we describe these topics with, that's where a lot of these misconceptions come in. So finding a way that we can, find a universal language, but also, empower different communities in the ways that, we talked about empowering young men and how sports could be an entry point to have these conversations. So we can still adapt our language to different communities, but still trying to find something universal to connect us all and fight back against some of these misconceptions. I think that covers everything, but Reverend Beauty, if I missed anything, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Hannah and Reverend Beauty. And then last but not least, group 3, Sarah Duvall and Istiak.
Yes, I think Istiak could probably reflect better than I did, because I think
Sorry, Sarah Duvall.
Oh,
very, very close.
But we did have 3 Sarahs in our group, so I can also.
I think her internet might have actually failed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, if you would like to share some points, I can also jump in for anything that missed while your electricity was giving you grief.
Well, hold on. Let me go to Istiak because you were taking notes. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think Isia should
Oh,
do that.
there's Sarah.
Notes.
She's on an island.
Isia was taking notes, because I was like in and out, and so I think because he actually coordinated the whole session, so I think he should maybe just give us what he copied and then what he could pick, and then we can just jump in and then beef it up from what he had gathered. Over to you, Isia.
Sorry, there was a misconception actually. I was actually moderating and I requested Sarah to take note, but her internet was not so good, so we missed all of that. So sorry. Maybe Sarah, you can try, but I was not taking note. I was actually moderating the sessions.
Well, let me just say, actually, we shared a lot about the work since my name, Sarah Vandera, actually spoke, because what she said was the same things that she had said before. She was just doing a kind of, I would say, a summary of how MPHS SS can be integrated in peace building and how their work are being done. And then we also shared, others shared their work. And sorry if I didn't get her name. Was it, let me just go through and then see, I will definitely know her. Ufra, if the spelling is correct, actually she presented a wonderful analysis of the work that they do, and how the challenges that they face in integrating peace building in psychosocial support as well as resilience. And then from my end, I'll just say better, because I will know what I said about the work that we do as women peace builders. We believe mental health and psychosocial support are an integral part of each other. They work together, because before you have sustainable peace, you must have healed the people, because most unaddressed trauma is a trigger for violence, because people carry a lot of hurting, and this will lead to violence. So we look at it as we need to work together peace building is not just the absence of war, or it's not just the mental health issue is not just for well-being, but also to promote conflict transformation and conflict of the people. And some of the activities that we did, our work that we were doing, it also helped us to know that peace building and psychosocial, for example, what we did in our group, from my work that I do, we found out that after group trauma healing sessions, communities were able to engage in dialogues with the local authorities and even with ex-combatants, because the healing process, the healing that they had, unlocked the courage for them to talk. I'm from a conflict affected region in Cameroon, and these are the things that we did to initiate community dialogues. We had to first of all heal the people, those that we wanted to talk to, and then to able to give them for them to create that empathy after the healing process, for them to be able to accept to talk with an ex-combatant that is part of your problems. And because of that, so that healing process is really, really important. And then we talk about resilience, that it is for us to build this capacity of communities to be able to recover and to rebuild. And that resilience is stronger when people are emotionally connected and supported. And in one of our activities that we did, it showed that those who were healed, those people that we talked to them, those transformed, I'll call them transformed. We helped youth able to transform their anger into activism. Because when we discover during the healing process, we discovered some of these youths, they had their grievances, and we had to help them to transform this anger into activism. And one of the things that we used was through peer monitoring. There was also dialogue sessions, and we also used the aspect of creative art therapy, where we had them vent out how they feel with artwork and what they think a better community will look like, still with using artwork, And then I also shared a personal story about myself, because I used artwork able to manage my anger, because with each time I was angry, I had to convert this anger into energy. And I used it in doing art, doing little work that I used to do in my free time. So those are the things that we talked about. And we talked about some of the challenges that we're facing. So we talked about finance. We talked about the aspect that people try to separate peace building and mental health and psychosocial support. No, because people think that these two aspects should be handled separately, but we think that it is a must these two go together in order for these actors to be able to work effectively and efficiently. So I think if there's anything to add, my colleague Sarah could.
I think you summarized it really good, and I love that you're sending us the visual mental health support today on the island. I know we're at time, but I do want to give 2 minutes. I saw someone coming from Khartoum, Sudan, who's been doing mental health and psychosocial support there. Mab, do you want to say a few words?
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, happy Mental Health Day to all of you. My name is Maab Salah from Sudan. I am a clinical psychologist and MHPSS coordinator in Bahri Emergency Response Room, Khartoum, Sudan. Today we have a final report from all the service we provided from since war in April to September 2025. You have some of questions here. We promoted mental health and well-being through providing psychosocial support services, including individual and group counseling sessions, and providing MHPSS in primary health care centers, and providing also emergency mental health medications and PSS to women and children in safe spaces, and make awareness and education sessions on mental health. Also, we integrated successful strategies, include providing psychosocial support through a specialized team. We have a psychiatrist, psychologist, a clinical psychologist, social worker in a team, and using a multi-layered approach that integrates mental health into protection and basic services. Also providing mental health service in primary healthcare and any like this, and coordinating among stakeholders to ensure comprehensive services. يعني like by training for volunteers and staff and community leaders in conflict zone, and developing tools to access service quality and measure impact. Also, the Peacebuilding sector can promote mental health and psychosocial support by providing financial and logistical support to local organizations, and يعني like developing uh, developing programs and policies that promote mental health and well-being in peace building.
Thank you.
Finally,
Yes,
the
go ahead.
current gaps include for sure limited funding which يعني this is a يعني very important thing and also weak referral and coordination systems with the local يعني with the local organizations يعني and need for tools to assess service quality and measurement impact and need for enhanced community participation in mental health services. I think that's all. Thank you.
No, thank you, Maya, for your intervention. I know we're really over time and people are already jumping to other meetings, but before we go, this is our last meeting of the year, so thanks everybody for a great year. And I just want to take the time to recognize some of the members of our inclusivity community of practice steering committee members who are present today. So a big thank you to Reverend Beauty, to Istiak, to Yemisrock, to who else is it? Anu, who else is in the room? Salim. And I know Sylvan was here earlier and Sarah Duvall. So just a big thank you all for helping to make and guide these meetings this year. And looking forward to giving everybody a follow-up readout on this with the recording.